Hello everyone. Today we are going to be working on a vector landscape, and what you're looking at right now is what our finished product will be. Today we'll be learning about how to organize our layers, about using gradients, and about making shapes as well. So a lot of new skills in this demo. So let's start off by making a new file. So at the top we're going to go to File, New. The dimensions we're going to be working with is that we are going to register it as pixels. Now remember that this will still be a vector drawing, but pixels is still a valid unit of measurement for the document itself. So I'll just ask that you name it your last name underscore landscape. Set the width to 1000 pixels, the height to 1500. On RGB color mode, and you can click Create. All right. Next thing we're going to do is quite simply go over to our rectangle tool, and we are going to draw a rectangle from corner to corner. So I'm just clicking and dragging my mouse from one corner to the other. You can see the pink lines are allowing us to snap perfectly, and you can even see the dimensions on the bottom right corner. Alright, so I have my rectangle and now my first layer. And we're going to name this background. Remember, feel free to fast forward as you like. I will be going through all of the steps, but go at your own pace as well. Now this will be our first time looking at gradients, so make sure that your fill is selected for the rectangle. And now we are going to go to our gradient panel. So we're not going to use the gradient tool, we're going to use the gradient panel. And what we see right now is all we have is black and white. So let's change that. Let's see now. Let's give it some kind of a base color. Now if we take a look here with white, if I double click what's known as a gradient slider and I click on color, there's not a whole lot of information here, and that's because white is not truly a color. So let's actually pick a color. There we go. Just to make certain options appear. Now if I go back to the color palette, I'll see down here that I have options to insert the specific color code. And our gradient's going to be made up of 4 colors. So before I even continue, I can go to my gradient. See how a plus sign appears when I hover just below the bar? I want you to click and you'll see another gradient slider has been added, and we'll click one more time to show that we now have 4 of them. So for the first one on the far left, you can double click, and the color code that you can use is going to be FDB983, and you can just hit enter. Our second one, double click. This code is going to be FF6655, enter. Our next gradient will be 7B0F3B. And our last one, now this is solid black, so again we don't have any color information coming through because black is not a color. So we'll just trick it, choose another color, go back to our color palette, and now we have the color code option. This one's going to be 310045, enter. Wonderful. Now with our sunset, our gradient's currently facing the wrong direction. So right here we have the option where we can change the angle of the gradient. So we're going to change this to 90 degrees. And there we are. We have it going from light to dark. And you can play around with the gradient sliders to set the gradient to how you like. I want it to be primarily bright, so I'm going to slide the darker colors over a fair bit. I'm actually just going to squash my gradient panel. I'm going to bring this light one over here, and I want this light one even further actually. still allowing for a smooth transition. You see these little gradient sliders up here. If I move this one too close to one of the colors, we see that there's a very quick transition, but if I keep this one more so in between the two, it allows for a much smoother transition. Now I do want that one up a little bit more. Play around with your own preferences. This is just how I'm deciding to do it for this. And I want there to be a bit of a darker area. All right, I'm happy with that. Now, what we're going to start to do is to draw these areas of land that we see. So we have a layer for background. We are now going to create a new layer. We'll name it Hills. Now make sure that no other layer is selected. Remember, we can't actually select this layer yet because nothing has been written on it, or pardon me, drawn on it. But as long as it's highlighted and the background layer is not selected, we are good to go. So we're going to use our trusty pen tool. P is the shortcut, as you know. And we're just going to begin randomly clicking and dragging points across the width of the artboard to create the outline of a series of mountains. Now you want to be sure to start the path beyond the artboard, not on it, as well as to end it beyond the artboard as well. So I'm going to start kind of lower, I'd say. Let's go right about here. All right, there's my first point. I'm just going to click and drag randomly. I'm going to zoom in. Now be sure to set your stroke and fill with your fill to none, and you can leave your stroke as black for now. But just very organically play around with different kind of mountainous shapes, highs and lows. There's no real right and wrong for this. It depends on what kind of mountains you want, how realistic you want them to be. Is it going to look like it's out of National Geographic or a Dr. Seuss novel? I'm going to have a bit of a higher peak over here. And again, bringing everything beyond the actual board. And now we're going to close this off into a shape. So I'm going to hold Shift to make sure I got nice straight lines. Click, Shift again. You can see how a pink line appeared to show me that I'm intersecting with my starting point. So I'm going to click, and now holding Shift again, straight shot to the starting point. Got the circle by my pen tool, and click. All right. So what we're going to do here is just check in our layers panel underneath Hills, and we're going to name this one First, because it's going to be our first layer of hills. Now let's give this some color. So we're going to have our fill selected. We're going to go to gradient. Now we obviously don't want this gradient, but we can change that. So if we don't want these sliders, we can very easily just move them off to the side. You can see that if you move fast enough to the right, it tends to actually take them straight off of the gradient bar. And now we are left with just two bases that we can now change. So the first one, double clicked on that slider, and I'm going to use the color code E05, F4D. I'm going to hit enter. Second one, double click. Color code's going to be BC0E40, enter. Again, we're going to change our angle to 90 degrees. Wonderful. And I'm going to move these sliders so there's one at each end. And what I'm going to do is move this gradient slider so that when I look at my mountains, just the tips of the mountains are getting that darker color. So play around with that till you're happy. That looks good. Alrighty. Now we're going to use the pen tool to draw our next set of hills. So again, go beyond the artboard. Play around with organic work. Oh, I used the wrong pen tool, so I'm just going to change that. Now notice that my stroke and fill were wrong, so I'm just going to change that to none. Keep the black lines for now. Remember that if you're not happy with how your mountains look, you can always go back and use the direct selection tool to change certain points and paths. Remember that the term path simply refers to a line. And again, I'm going to go beyond, and I'm going to close the shape by going all the way down, all the way back to the left, wait for that line of intersection, and all the way back to where I started. And now we're going to work on the fill for this one, and we're going to change the colors. This time I'm going to use for my first one the color code D9263D and enter. And the second one will be 7D053D, enter. Again, flip it around to a 90-degree and make it so that just the tips of the mountains are receiving that visible color. Lovely. Alrighty. And if we take a look here in our layers panel, I'm going to name this one second because it's our second batch of hills. And now you're going to do the same thing. We're going to draw now a third row. Again, just starting beyond the artboard. I really want to start getting sharper shapes, I think. A lot of my edges are a bit rounded. And again, I forgot to reset my stroke and fill. Just still trying to randomize. And then going beyond the artboard, holding shift, here we go, closing the shape, finding that point of intersection, good. And now for this gradient, let's change it up again. If you'll notice, we're going from a light direct background to slightly darker shades. So now we're going to go even darker for this next layer. And we'll make this first slider have the code AD0536. And the second one will be 5F001E. Again, flip it to 90 degrees. Just have it so that the tip of the mountains receives that darkest part. And layers panel, I'm going to name this third. And now let's finish off with a fourth one. So we'll make this one a bit smoother going across, less bumps and hills. Again, make sure your stroke and fill set to none. Very slight changes in the land. And off to the edge again. And close the shape. Alright, one more gradient fill here. And now this one, I'm going to use a similar, or actually the same color, 5F001E. And then go a bit darker this time with 430018. Enter. Good, 90 degrees. Alrighty. And now what I'm just going to do with the layers panel, label it as the fourth hill. And I've noticed now that I have a black outline on all my shapes. We know that's not very aesthetically pleasing. So I have all layers selected. I'm going to click on my stroke here on the left, change the stroke to none. And now we can see here that we just have the colors stopping naturally. You can zoom in, and it's a beautiful transition. No harsh lines. Wonderful. Zooming back out. Remember, it's the same as in Photoshop for zooming in and out, where you just hold down Command and the minus and plus signs. And we're going to draw one more shape, and for this one I'm actually going to create a new layer. I'm going to layer it foreground. Foreground means a part of the scenery that is closest to us. and oftentimes lowest in the composition. So I'm going to grab my pen tool, and this one's going to go almost straight across with just a few minor dips here and there. Finish it off the same way. Look for those intersecting lines. And the fill that I'm going to use for this one, I just clicked on the fill over here. I don't want a gradient, so I'm going to go up to the color guide here. I'm going to type in the color, just a darker shade of red. It's going to be 320115. I'm going to hit enter. There we go, we have our darker shade of red. Excellent. Now, just to make the transition between these three layers here, our second, third, and fourth shapes, we're just going to take a moment to reduce the opacity. So I'm going to open up my layers panel, open up the hills pathways. I'm going to select my second, pardon me. I'm going to select my second, third, and fourth layer. So you can see that those are highlighted. Remember to hold down shift when you're selecting more than one item. I'm going to go up to opacity. I'm going to soften this to 70% and hit enter. Alright, very slight, just enough to create a bit of a hazy atmosphere. Alright, now it's time to add that burning sun that was in our original image that we looked at. So over here we have our landscape, or our mountains rather. Now it's time to add that sun. So we're going to go over to our rectangle tool. We're going to right click, click on ellipse, and now while holding shift we are going to click and drag to make a big sun. And make sure when you are happy with the shape that you let go of your mouse first and then let go of shift. We can see that it's already assumed a gradient, but we are going to change this a bit. And actually, for the sake of organization, we are going to give the sun its own layer. So we're going to create a new layer. We're going to name it sun, and then we are going to click and drag this pathway into the sun layer. Good. Alright, now we have the sun selected, so we'll click on the gradients, and let's change the colors to bright oranges and reds. So I'm going to go with FF814D as the first color, and the second one is going to be more of a red, and it's going to be D92940, and enter. Now we're going to go with a radial gradient because that makes sense for a sun. So under gradient type for linear, I'm going to choose radial. And we are just going to keep the settings where they are. We'll have each of the colors on the far end, but then for the gradient slider, just play around with where you think you'd like it. I'm happy with it right about here, with the orange more so just grazing the edges. Alright, now use your move tool, or pardon me, your selection tool, to bring the sun down to a position where it looks like it's just cresting off of that landscape. And now take a moment to go to your layers panel and put the sun behind the hills. So in order to do that, essentially we have to put the sun underneath the hills. So click and drag, and there we are, the sun's underneath the hills. You can just click off of the artboard just to see how it's looking so far, looking very nice. And now let's give this a bit of a glow. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the sun, go to Effect, go to Stylize, and Outer Glow, a familiar term from Photoshop. Click on this black square. This is going to determine our color. And we are going to use the color code FF9100. Go ahead and click Enter or OK. We're going to change the mode to Color Dodge. Again, familiar blending terminology from Photoshop. Change the opacity to 100%, and the blur to 100 and click OK. Actually move the box out of the way so you can see what happens. Click OK. And we can see that a very nice faint glow has wrapped itself around the sun. Now what we're going to do is add a faint moon. So I'm going to make a new layer for this. I'm going to put it right at the top of everything. I'm going to name it Moon. So for this, once again, we're going to need the ellipse tool. It's going to be a smaller shape, but hold down Shift. And that looks about right. Remember to let go of the mouse first while still holding Shift. We're going to turn this shape white, so you can easily just click the default fill and stroke, and then change the stroke to none. And then have your move tool selected. And now what we're going to do is duplicate this, because what we want is, we don't want a full moon, we want a crescent moon. And there's a very easy way to do this. So with your selection tool currently being selected, hover over the moon and hold down Alt. And you can see how now two arrowheads have appeared. I'll release Alt. This is the regular mouse. If I hold down Alt, I see two arrowheads. Now I'm going to click and drag a second moon shape. And I don't want to move it all the way off. What I want to do is have them intersect and overlap so that I'm outlining a crescent moon shape, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. Not a fan of the color yellow for this, so I'm just going to double click on the moon layer and change this to, let's change it to blue, a dark blue. And X, and click OK. Alright, so what I want you to notice here is the shape that I'm currently outlining by having the actual circles overlap is this crescent moon area here. So now what we want to do is have both of these circles selected. So I'm holding Shift and clicking both, and you can see that they're both selected now. Then you want to open up your Pathfinder window. If you're not sure where it is on here, on your right side toolbar, you can simply go over to Window, scroll down to find Pathfinder, and then this handy little window is going to pop up, and you are going to choose the shape mode -front. And when you do that, you'll see that you are just left with the crescent moon shape. Alright, and now with this crescent moon, we're going to apply the same outer glow. So you can even apply outer glow from there. Perhaps it didn't work. So we'll do it manually. We'll go to Effect, go to Stylize, Outer Glow. And we will have color dodge, 100% opacity, and let's change the blur to 20. Select OK. Oh my goodness. So this is where we hit Command Z when things don't go right. So Command Z, Command Z again, Command Z again. Alright, so we'll just go back to cutting out our shape by using the -front shape mode, and then we'll do this manually. Go to Effect, Stylize, Outer Glow. Alrighty, we got our color dodge. We'll use the same color that we did for the glow of the sun. We have the blur set to 20. We're going to click OK. There we go, a much softer, more natural glow. Wonderful. And we're actually also going to take the moon and we're going to lower its opacity to about 40%. There we go. And if we just click off the artboard, we can see that now it's just kind of softly present. Alright, now it's time for the finer details. I want you to zoom very far into your space, and we're going to draw another circle using the ellipse tool. Just a small one. Hold Shift. There we are. And we're going to be making little stars. So with your shape made, you are going to go up to Effect. You're going to go to Distort, Transform. You're going to go to Pucker and Bloat. You might remember this from when we did the experiment of where we turned ourselves into zombies and aliens. And what we want is we're going to want the circle to pucker into a star shape. So we're going to change 0% to -60%. When we click OK, watch what happens. The center of the circle has pulled inwards and it's created a star. So now what we're going to do is we are going to hold down Shift and pull in the corner of the star and make it even smaller. Remember always to let go of your mouse first and then let go of Shift. And now go over to your panels here and find the Symbols panel. If you can't find it, go over to Window, scroll down until Find Symbols. And I'll pull this up over here. Alright, we're going to make a new symbol, so hit New Symbol. We're going to name it Star. And you are going to click OK. You can see here that the star is now one of our symbols, and we can delete this original one now. So if I'm just going to use my selection tool, click on the star to be sure and hit delete, we still have the star as our symbol. Now it's time to actually apply the stars. So I'm going to use Command -sign to zoom out, and I'm going to bring my symbols panel back where it belongs. Alright. Next thing we're going to do is use something called a symbol sprayer. It's this tool right over here. And you can determine how much space is going to be covered with the symbol sprayer with the square brackets, similar to how we adjust our brush sizes. And you can experiment with this by clicking and dragging as you like. I find that it makes a bit too much of a concise pathway, so I try to keep things as sporadic as possible. I'm just clicking and holding and moving the mouse around. It's okay if you go off the artboard. Now, one thing that I do suggest that I just made a mistake with is having the stars on top of the moon. That's not very logical, so I'm actually going to go back and try again. Let's try that again. I'm just trying to go in circular sporadic motions, avoiding the actual moon. You can have some of stars kind of trickle down into the dark red, but try to make them more content heavy in the dark purple because that's where the night sky is most prominent. But be sporadic. Don't worry about it being perfect. And now what we can do as well is if we go back to the symbol sprayer, right click, we can also use the symbol sizer, which will make stars bigger. And if you just very randomly go over them, you'll get a bit of size variation. Very slight, but just enough to try to naturalize things a bit. If you hold Alt, it will decrease the size of the stars. And now finally, we're going to right click over here and use the symbol screener tool and just randomly click across the sky. Because what it does is that it is going to reduce the opacity of some of the star shapes, just to have a variety of brightness. Again, very randomly, not methodical. Alright, now what we're going to do is go to our Layers panel. We're going to make sure that the symbol set is selected, and you can rename this one here. This is our moon, and we're just going to name it that so we don't get confused. And we can name this layer Moon and Stars. But now let's just have our symbol set selected, and we are going to reduce the entire opacity to 40. There we go, a lot more subtle. Now let's zoom out and see how things are looking. Pretty nice. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a silhouette. And a silhouette really just means a blacked out shape because of lighting. So what we have here is our light source coming from our background, which means that our foreground is going to be silhouetted. We won't be able to see details, just a color blocked outline of whatever we decide to draw. And what I think we're going to draw today is we're going to draw a cactus, a few cacti. So let's create a new layer. We will call it cacti. And we are going to choose not our paintbrush tool, but our blob brush tool. And we're going to select our fill. Then we're going to use our eyedropper with the shortcut I to sample from our foreground color. And that is what we will use to paint. So then go and select the blob brush again. Again, you can use the square brackets to adjust your brush size, and then just very naturally click and drag to create a cactus shape. Now these black lines here, that is the outline of your actual artboard, so make sure that you stay within those. And we can stretch this up even further. You can vary the size of the brush as you go. I'm going to have one branch out here, and then I will have one lower one branch out here as well. And now let's have a smaller one in the distance. And so to do that, remember that when we explored how we can depict distance and space, is that things that are farther away from us are smaller. So I'm going to use a thinner brush. And I'm going to draw a cacti in the distance. Give it a bit of a wider base, try to make it look more natural. Just give it a little handle here. And bigger cacti arm there, good. And I'll do one mid-sized one over here. So one that's not quite as big as this one, not quite as small as this one. Let's see how we can do. Make it about that big. And we'll make this arm go way up here. And this arm can come up just a bit. Alright. Now, I take a look here and it didn't go on my cacti layer. I can see that it actually went to my foreground, and I believe that's because we used the exact same color and drew directly on the foreground. So we can see with the green outline that this is now all part of the same shape. If you want to avoid that, I believe what you can do is, let's say that I have my cacti layer active, and I believe, let's give this a try, that you can actually paint outside of the artboard. And then with your move tool, there we go. With your move tool, you can bring it in as a separate entity. So if I use my selection tool and click off, so I see here that if I start drawing directly on the foreground, the cacti now become part of the shape. But if I draw the cactus outside of the artboard like we just did, it now becomes its own object that we can move freely. I can't move these freely, it moves the entire foreground. So that is something important to keep in mind. When we zoom out, we're almost done. Alright, so now we are essentially just going to trim the edges of our work. How we're going to do that is we are going to use our rectangle tool. We're going to set the fill to none, the stroke to none, and we are going to zoom in. We're going to trace from one corner all the way down to the other. Don't be alarmed if it looks like there's a whole bunch of white space. That's just Illustrator not being able to process the change in screen direction right away. Try to match those corners best you can, and you can release. If we zoom on out. Alright, so now we want to go into our layers panel. We want to select all the layers, so hold down shift, select them all, and you can see that everything's being selected actually on the artboard. Now we are going to go over here with our selection tool. We're going to right click, we're going to say make clipping mask. And if you take a look, all of these layers have now gone blank, and all the layers can now be found underneath this one. It has made now what's known as a clipping group. It was basically just a method of trimming the edges of our artwork, and we are left with a beautiful desert scene that we can still always go back and edit. So well done, everyone. This is an intro to what will be your first vector assignment. Hope you enjoyed it.